Okay, let's get started. Today is Massive Android Example Day. And where are you going to find these massive Android examples? Let me show you real quick here. Let me zoom in so you can see what I'm looking at. If you go to bhacker.com and you click on the Android phone application development link, which is right here, second one down, and you go into the supplemental notes, which is in the second box. Yeah, second box from the top. You'll see, if you haven't done it already, you'll see some notes on, I don't know, Java review, stuff like that, but you don't really have to worry about that. Example projects are the two that you're going to be interested in looking at. These are the ones I'm going to go over today. One of this files, the layout, has 6 different layouts in it that I'm going to go over, which is every possible combination you could probably come up with. And then miscellaneous features, you have in here 22 Android programs. That's going to show you a bunch of stuff, all of which we went over on Wednesday in the PowerPoints. But this is the source code. And the reason why there's 22 of them is because each project only shows you one thing. Like one of them will have a list box. The other one will have some check boxes. One will have radio buttons and stuff. I did it this way because it's simpler. Because you can go to the one you're looking at, load the project in, and I'll show you how to load it in a few minutes. And then you can, basically learn from the examples. So it's basically dissected out so that you may learn, hopefully, learn by example, hopefully. Let me show you how that's going to be done. So if you download those 2 files, you click on the links, and you save the links to the desktop. These are going to be zip files. If you download the zip files, here they are. Oops, let me minimize this stuff. Here's a zip file here. I'll take and load in one of the projects so you can see how it's done. But you double click on it if you're on a Mac system, and it removes it, what do we call it? Deflates it, creates the, the folder out of it. PK unzip will do it on a Windows system, equivalent. If you double click on the file, this is the one that says layouts on it. Layouts, here's our 6 layout example that we have. What I'm going to do is delete one of my examples that's in here. I took the liberty of preloading all of my examples in here, which took about an hour, actually. So be prepared if you're going to load all these examples to allot some time. However, you may not necessarily want to load all of them. You might probably just want to load a couple of them. But I'm going to show you all of them so you can sort of see what's going on. I'm going to take one of the layouts as an example here. And I'll take the linear layout one here. And I'm going to delete it. If I delete it, I'm actually going to delete the, I'm going to delete the folder that's in the workspace directory as well. If I press this little button here, which you're probably not going to want to do, if you remove something out of Eclipse, if I want to remove it completely, I click this little button here and it will remove it from the workspace directory as well. So if I press OK, I have no more linear example in here. And if I go out to the workspace directory, I should notice that it's also gone. The workspace directory for me is right off of Home, Workspace. This is where all my Android projects are being kept. And so in here I had one that was called, actually it was on the left hand side I believe, and it was called Linear Example. Actually it was right here. Now it's gone. So now what I'm going to do is show you how to load it back in. So I'm going to pretend like I don't have anything loaded in here at all. And I've downloaded this example over here, and it's sitting on my desktop called AP Layouts in this folder here. So here's how you get the examples into Eclipse. So you go File, and it's already in an Eclipse project, each one of these folders. Imports, so File Imports, and it's going to say existing, by default it should probably highlight existing projects into Workspace, and then click on Next. And then click on your Browse button here for the directory. And I'm going to go to my desktop where I have that folder, and I'm going to click on AP Layouts. And then I'm going to see this linear layout example, the one I just deleted. And I'm going to go OK. If it doesn't show up in the window, you've downloaded an example from the internet, and you've decided you're going to take this approach and import it in, but it doesn't show up in the window, it's not an Eclipse project. You're never going to be able to get it in correctly. If you do it this way and it shows up in the window, it's going to come in just fine, no problem. So that's your key right there. Finish. And here's my linear layout example. All of the linear layouts examples, all of these examples are compatible with Android 2.33 or above. So if you have 4.0, 5.0, whatever, it only goes up to 4, 3, 4, whatever you have, it should work just fine. So I did it in the lower API only because they're old examples and I had them from, and I'm running them in a 2.37 emulator, and I'm going to run them in VirtualBox actually. So let's start with example number 1, which is the linear layout. So if you load this in, you'll see there's only one source code file, and it's an activity, as we learned before. The activity itself is going to load something. What's it going to load? It's going to load an XML file, and the XML file is going to have a linear layout in it. I took the liberty and the same functionality in all 6 of the layout examples. The same functionality exists in the activity class. And the activity class is just doing nothing more than loading an intent, which we've already seen actually. And the intent's going to open up a URL, Google. It's going to go open up a Google web page. And I kind of put this in here to sort of reiterate a new point to you. Before we created another file, when we did the first project for this course, the Hello World, we had a name getter class that was associated with an XML file. We created an intent that loaded the name getter and passed a piece of information back and forth. Well, we don't have any information to pass in this particular case. And we don't have any other Excel files, and we don't have any other classes. But what I'm going to do is, this is kind of a built-in way. The URI object is a web object. And it's a great way of just sending it and parsing this text here, which is what that means. The method says parse this, create a URI object. And it's going to essentially bring up a WebView for us, which I'm going to talk about WebViews in a few minutes, so I'll save this for the WebView conversation. But this should look familiar. It's an instance of the intent object, so intent, new intent, and we're running, this is the constructor for the object, and the object takes on the parameters of the intent, which is the first one, which is this action view, which is a built-in functionality that we're going to get automatically. So it's a quick and easy way of bringing up a web browser, bringing up the phone book, and I have another one that's going to bring up a dialer, bring up chat, bring up anything we want. We use an intent for it, essentially. And we saw this in last week's lecture as well. It's the onClick method. The onClick method is part of the onClick listener. And we extended, we actually created an add listener on a button method here and called it here, which is kind of an interesting way of doing it. The same code is in all 6 of these examples, so I only have to go through it once. But the way this particular class is running, we're extending from activity, so it's just a regular old activity class. We have a button that we're going to create, which is a reference to an object called button. And we're loading the main context view. The layout is going to be main, and that's going to be main.xml file that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And then on the create, we're going to call the add listener on button. Because we added a listener on the button in this method here, because this method is button, get the button number 1 from the layout, and then button.set onClick listener, set the new onClick listener, and the new onClick listener's got the onClick, and the onClick is essentially just going to start this new activity. The new activity is going to be this intent, and the intent's going to open up a Google page. That's our entire functionality of the entire program for the next 6 programs I'm going to show you. And the reason why I'm showing you these programs, however, is because of the interface. I want to show you the layouts. So if we go into the resource folder, we see in the layouts, in main, for this particular one, this particular example is a linear layout example. So obviously we're going to have a linear layout in here. And here's what a linear layout sort of looks like. I just put 1, 2, 3 buttons on here. And it's in a linear format, which means, if I click on main here, you can actually kind of, the code here, you can actually kind of see it. This is the part I'm talking about. So the layout is essentially going to put one right next to the other, right next to the other, right next to the other. And this is the wrapping the content per width and length. So the button is wrapped per the length and the width of the column that it's on. so it's going to take up the whole column, so which is why we have button number 1, button number 2, button number 3. And we kind of have it sort of like in a line that's positioning down. Doesn't give us very much flexibility. I'll take another look at it to see what this looks like. But it's wrapping the content of this particular element is the width of the column. And so it's basically going to put you in a sequence, which doesn't give you, I mean, maybe if you wanted to create a column, a single column, you wanted to have it word wrapped, we could change the features around here. And what you can do is, I highly recommend it, is actually when you download the example, take a look at this and go, well, this is the linear layout, and I have 3 buttons on it. Well, let's change the wrap content on the width and the height. You know, let's change the, let's add, the layout width here was equal to 1. We didn't add a width on the rest of them. Let's go ahead and play around with it. And you'll actually kind of sort of learn by example and learn by changing the configuration around to see how the buttons look, essentially, and what the buttons do. And you can see we don't really have that much that we can actually add to this, which is why it comes in handy for certain things. If we run the linear layout, it looks like run as Android application. And I'm using VirtualBox and where's my emulator? Here is the run of the linear layout. Oops, you can see, hopefully you can see that. Button number 1, button number 2. We put the on-click listener, oops, on, let me get this integration turned off. Disable, it is disabled. Okay, so if I click button number 3, button number 2, nothing happens. If I click button number 1, the intent's going to work. Essentially, it's going to bring up Google. So I got a Google page that comes up. It's the same functionality is going to exist, but what you're looking at is the layout, actually. And the layout's associated with the way that the buttons are presented in a linear fashion. So kind of a boring example, so let's move on. So if we're not going to use a linear layout, we'll step it up a little bit. We'll use a relative layout. This is the one I end up having most luck with in terms of being able to arrange items. So now I can skip the code part. It looks identical. The only thing different is the XML file. So if I go in and I look at the XML file in this particular case, I now see that I still have my main.xml here. Now I see the word relative layout, which is the only difference essentially with this particular example. We're still wrapping the content, We have button number 1, button number 2, button number 3 here. And we have a text view here, user. We have an edit field, so this is going to ask for a username or password or something. If we take a look at this, the interface looks like this. So we can arrange things in relationship with other things. We could put the buttons up here relative to each other. We could put the label here with the the edit the text here, and we could put this button down here rather than having this button up here. If we had a linear, they'd all show up back to back essentially. But now we can actually arrange these so that they're in a relative layout. If we do that, you might see here, align parent right, align parent left, align top of the text view. So we have the edit text, which is this particular item, this edit text text box, which is to the right of button number 3. So we can say in relationship, in relative, and here we have button number 3 over here, which is below, the layout is below, the text view is below this particular item. So if we create this and we give it, we don't like to say, let's say for example you don't want to know what's above and below, to the right and to the left, and relative to this and to that, etc. and so forth, you can actually just use it to drag and drop on this. So you could take items as an example and stick them in, and you'll see the arrows, and this only works with the relative view. It does not work the same with the layouts for the linear, because this is actually going to put it in a relationship. So let's say, example, I want this thing to be in the middle. Let's put it right here. So now I've added a button here, and I was able to select where on here. If this was the linear layout, and I can go back there, but I won't because it'll bore you completely, and I add an item, it's going to show up over here. It's going to show up one right after the other. But it comes in handy for certain things. Most people would use a linear layout when they only have one item on the screen. And you don't want to bother having to set all these other things. So it's a little bit easier. This you know, I want it down here, so I'm using a relative layout. So if I run this particular example, yours isn't going to have the spinner on there because I just put that on there. But the relative layout allows us to set items, widgets, in relationship with other widgets. And now I see that this is actually appearing exactly where I want it to be. It didn't word wrap. It didn't show up here or somewhere else. And then this is, you know, below this. And this particular item here is not part of the layout. This particular item is a widget. I'll throw it down. It mimics the side button, actually, of the phone. So it's just for the emulator. So I did have someone a while ago, you know, ask me about that, and I'm like, no, that's not part of the layout. That's on there all the time. So don't worry about that. And feel free to stop me if you have questions as I'm going through this. Otherwise, I'm going to start plowing through all these examples. So that is the relative layout number 2. The third layout on my list to show you today, and this is going to be a little bit more interesting now. I'm going to go to the WebView layout. The WebView layout allows you to basically take the entire layout and turn it into a web page, WebView. If I had to do that, let's take a look here. WebView layout down here on the bottom. Believe it or not, the source code is the same, but instead of a button when you press it going to the URL, it's just going to show up automatically. Actually, I think there's a button on here. Anyway, let's take a look. It might actually be a button. Yep, we do. We have main. Main's got a button on it. The button, when you press the button, it's going to take you to Google. So this is what main looks like. You're like, okay, that doesn't look like very much. It isn't. It's a linear layout. So that's why you would use a linear layout. You just have a button on the screen. You're not going to do anything with it. It's kind of lightweight. So we call the button number 1, and we put the text on the button that says go to Google. So the button itself graphically looks like that. We have a separate layout, another layout in here, and I'm going to use an intent actually. And I'll show you the code for this because it's a little bit different. It's called WebView.xml. WebView.xml, as soon as it loads in the right-hand side over here, looks like that. And like, oh, this is really interesting, very exciting. Nothing really on it. Well, you're right. There isn't very much on it. It's called a view. Notice we don't have a linear layout. We don't have a relative layout. We don't have any of the other options on here. List view layout. We have a web view. A web view actually mimics it is a layout, actually. And we stuffed the layout on a separate XML sheet. In this particular case, we don't have to. I could take this and put it into something else if I wanted to. But the example also shows you the use of the intent again. So if I go up, take a look at the source code here, I have one XML file that's going to be calling the other. And notice I have a main activity, and then I have a WebView activity. So I'm following through the same pattern. And hopefully after I give this to you a couple of times, you'll start. I won't have to repeat it. You'll just automatically, oh yeah, each one class per XML file. In this particular case, it's just a pattern, a design pattern you can follow. So here's main activity. Main activity has a button. Remember that button that was on main XML sheet? And setting the context view to this, just a different way of doing it. It's the same concept as what we've been doing before. Set context view, and we're just keeping track of this in terms of main is going to call the web view and then back and forth. Actually, it doesn't go back. It just calls the web view. That's it. It doesn't go back. Set the context view to main, and then down here on the bottom, lo and behold, this should start looking familiar. This is an intent that we've created that we're going to essentially call when we click the on. This is the same code as before, actually, the on-click method that we're running. The on-click method is attached to, or is a method of the on-click listener, and the on-click listener is attached to the button.set on-click listener equals new on-click listener. So we're creating a new instance of the on-click listener object, and inside of the object we have the method, and the method is on-click, and on-click it's going to use this intent. So intent is equal to the new intent. This is the context this, which is why we set context this up here. So we could just replace this with the word this. If you don't like this line of code up here, and it does the same thing. But usually you'll see it, well actually let's take this out because there's another reason why that was in there. But long story short, it's done so you don't have to repeat this over and over again and have to worry about what is this? Well, it's context. context is this context. In terms of main is going to call the WebView. And actually it's going to call WebView activity class. WebView activity class is our first exposure to the WebView. And I have another example for WebView that's a little bit more sophisticated, but it's pretty much all the same. Here's our WebView class. WebView class extends activity, same way as the main class extends. But now we have a new reference object called WebView, which is instance of object WebView in terms of its type. Setting the context view to WebView, XML is the XML file. So WebView, we're going to find, this is how we find the item from the resource, if you remember. Take the resource from, look it up in the r.ids associated with this particular reference object that we're casting to WebView. Say now it's WebView. WebView.getSettings.set JavaScript enable. Believe it or not, there's about 20 or 30 different sets that you can do. You set Java, turn on cookies, turn off cookies, turn on cache, clear cache, refresh. Tons of different options that you can set, just like a regular web browser, actually. And there's all methods that are built in that work with the WebView object. So the methods that you run on WebView. This particular example could load the URL google.com, but instead it's going to take a custom string. It's going to load the HTML string into the WebView, because the WebView holds HTML format. So we could also take this, put it in the asset folder, create a file, and load the URL from the asset folder if we wanted to. Not load it from the World Wide Web. Load a local file, an HTML file. Take the HTML file, load it into the WebView. Or we can, in this particular case, just take this custom HTML string, load it into the WebView. This is what we're doing in here. So if I run this program, I'm going to get a screen that comes up with a button, and the button's going to say, click for Google. Let's take a look here. Click to go to Google. Well, it's not. It's going to run that. It's going to load that string, because that's I put the string in there. So it's going to. Here's the Hello WebView string that I put in there. If I take that string out and I comment out this code here and run it, it'll go to Google instead. Because now I'm loading a URL, www.google. I actually go anywhere I want it to go, as long as I tell it to go somewhere. So this will take me to Google. There we go. So you can see it's pretty functional in terms of being able to use it. And this is the web view, which is a layout, actually. It's the layout of here. Now you could take the web view and lower it down a little bit, put buttons on the top. The buttons would be back, forward, favorites. Actually, you could take and create and run methods from the web view. So if you create back, it would go webview.goback and run all of the methods that are associated with the web view. What's associated with web, all the basic web functionality that you'd possibly imagine with a web browser. So it's very functional, actually, once you get familiar with the methods. And how you get familiar with the methods, you look at the examples, essentially, and you can learn what methods. Nobody knows exactly every method that's associated with every object out there, but when you create a WebView object, just know that you have some options. So that was one of our layouts, and let me close this one. Another trick, actually, if you want to conserve memory and have your system run faster, is to start closing your projects. And close the windows after you run the projects. Otherwise, you won't get those error messages. But it makes my Eclipse run a little bit faster. So let's take a look at the table layout next. Table layout. And this is, again, still in that first file. Table layout example. I can look at the source because it's the same as the linear layout and the relative layout. Actually, it's the same as the web layout. But let's take a look at the XML file. Now this looks interesting. Well, okay, so the GUI items are labeled per column. So this is column 1, column 2. This particular item is spanning column 1 and column 2. And then this is a row. And then we have this red line here that's separating the next row. And in the next row we have column 1, column 2, column 3. And we can stick things in different columns. So if you want to work with a table of data, it's a bad idea to, set the layout to a table layout. And so lo and behold, what is making this into a table layout? Well, the keyword table layout. So up here, instead of using a linear, instead of using a relative WebView, we're using table. And table layout, obviously is going to have table rows. And inside of the table rows is where we're putting the text view and the buttons. Here we have column 1. Column 1 was a text label. It's a label text view. Column number 2 had a button in it. And the next row, we had, I think we have 2 more buttons going on in here. We have some padding in between the cells. So if you go back to so this is very similar to HTML actually. The things you can set in terms of HTML tags on a table. You can set padding. You can set the line thickness, the color of the line, show the line, don't show the line, all these sort of different things. It's pretty much the same as HTML. In fact, you can see this here. This is very HTML-ish too, the background color. And it's using an RGB scale, so nobody memorizes all those colors. You just go online and you find one of those color charts. You hover your mouse over it, or you click on it, it tells you the code that you're supposed to type in to get that color that you're looking for. So you can see we have another table row down on the bottom here, on the table row down there. And this is the red line actually on the view. So we have another column. Excuse me, another row, and in the row we have another text label and some more buttons, etc. and so forth. So if I run it, it's going to give me exactly what you would think I would get, actually. I'm going to hopefully get a table. And the table is actually, when you press the first item, it's going to send you to the web browser. So I'm not going to press anything. So you can sort of see it's the same as it looks the same, which is nice because we can create table views and know exactly what it's going to look like without having to guess. Linear layouts sometimes look different, especially if you put it in landscape mode. You move the orientation, or it's on a different size screen. You're not really guaranteed something's not going to word wrap or something's not going to go where you may not think it's going to possibly go. But, all right, so that's the table. List view is a little bit more interesting, so let's move on to that. And these examples get progressively harder as we go along. So I'll step it up a little bit. We'll look at the list view and the grid view, which is probably the most interesting in terms of the views. So list view layout example. The XML is the only thing that's really different about this example. So in the XML, when we start looking at grid views and list views, then we start adding a second component to it, because we have the element and then we have the items inside of the element. So we have a list, and we have a list of something, and those are the elements. So in the main we just have the list. And the list, well, it's nothing. It's just going to be a text view. We don't actually have anything in main in this particular example. So the list item, however, is going to be in a linear layout. Okay, I said, why use a linear layout? Because we just have an image and we have a piece of text that's going to be associated with the image. So we're going to have a list of items. They're going to appear on the screen. And in each one of the list items, we're going to have an image. We're going to have a text label that goes along with the image. And let me run it so you can actually see what this looks like. Because you can't tell what it looks like you're looking at the XML only because it's separated out into those two XML components. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have an image. And this is where in each one of these list items is using a linear layout. And the linear layout is nothing. This is a great good purpose for a linear layout. It's kind of lightweight. You just load the image and load text next to it. So in this particular example, I don't know if there's functional. It's putting up a toast message, and I'll show you the toast in another example. Actually, I'll show it to you coming up. So when you click on the list item, it actually shows you a little toast message that changes and it gives you the label that's associated with the list item that's clicked on. So here we go. When we take a look at the list items themselves, we see each one of them is using an icon, and the icon itself, the image itself here, is being loaded dynamically. because they don't all have the launcher icon, which is the main Android dude. They had different icons in there. The different icons were associated with each one. So essentially what we have is a technique that I'm showing you that essentially sets some defaults, and then programmatically we're going to populate the list with items. Because we don't, what do we have here? We have just one image, and we have an opening and closing tag for the image view. And the image view is nothing more than a view. It's another view actually, but it's not a layout. It's just a view, sort of like the WebView. And we have a text view, which is just going to be the text. So we have an image and a text, and if you look at this, you go, well, I have no idea what that's going to do. And if you look at main, well, there's nothing in main other than the title, and the title's gone. The title doesn't even appear. So it's, you know, it's all going to be done programmatically. So if I go into the source code, I see, oh, this is interesting. Now I have some functionality that's implemented. And what I've got is a list view adapter. And then I have the main class, which is the list view example activity. So let me take a look at that first. So the list view activity is going to be main, and I've got a string that's, an array of strings called sample, and that's where I'm getting the 1, 2, 3, 4 from. And on the create, it's going to take and make an instance of the list set list adapter, and it's going to create a new list view adapter inside of main for each one of the samples, for samples. So sample is going to have 1, 2, 3, which is where that 1, 2, 3, 4 is coming from in the list. Every time you see a list view, you'll see a list view adapter. The adapter is what basically creates the instances of the objects that are being held in the list view. It's two separate components, which is where most people get confused in terms of the list. You'd think you'd just be able to create a list view and add stuff into each one of the items. No, it's actually two separate components. The adapter controls the items that are inside of the views. So here we have an on list item click. This is where we're getting the toast message, and I don't know if I've shown you toast yet, so I'll just take a few minutes here and show it to you. I have a separate example called toast that you can look at as well. Toast is essentially make text is a method from toast, and toast is that little pop-up window that comes out. Why they called it toast, I have no idea. But for this, inside of this, which is main, which is this class here, we have the selected value, which is coming from the list view adapter. Toast, and this is a short method. If I change it to long, the toast message stays up there longer, and the dot show basically shows it automatically. So this is sort of like the system out in Android. It prints something to the screen, but it prints it in the little message box. So the interesting part of this example is the list view adapter. If I take a look at the code for the list view adapter, what I'm looking at then is it extends array adapter. Array adapter is they essentially going to take that array of strings and add an image with it and put it in a list item and allow me to load those items, those list items or the array items, into the GUI, into the view. So we're going to set the string to the values. It's going to be an array. It's the array that's going to be called sample. That's where we're sending it. We sent sample in main out here, if you remember. I said the list, we're going to create a new instance of the list view adapter. We're sending it sample. Sample is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4. So in here, we are going to set the layout to list items. List items is essentially this layout down here, which is going to be each one of our items that's going inside of the list. And the list items, essentially we're going to, from the view, because everything is a subclass of view, so we can take the view as a concept, and from the view we can get the view, get the items in the view, and the position from the view, so that when we have an on-click method, we can say this was view item, list item number 1, list item number 2, list item number 3, and the adapter is keeping track of each one of the items that's in the list. As soon as you create one of these, you can create more. I highly recommend playing around with this. Actually, it's the only way you're going to really learn how to actually create a list adapter. But all list adapters, all list views are done this way. There's a list view with a list adapter, because it's two separate components. And then you can actually switch. So you can have a list with multiple adapters, with multiple different types of items inside of the list. They don't always have to be the same item coming from the same adapter. You can create custom adapters that do almost anything, actually. Load web pages inside of list items, load music, load anything you want in there, which kind of creates some interesting applications. Here we have the view is the row view. The row view is going to be the inflator of the list item for each one of the rows that we're going to have. We're going to load one of these guys in here. We have a text view that has a label on it. We have an image view that has the logo. This is the same thing we saw in the XML file, but it was kind of generic. We added a logo. We added an image that was the IC launcher, which is the Android guy that shows up as the application, the default application icon. It's being loaded in, so we're going to have to change that for each one of the items. So what are we going to do here? We're going to change the icon based on the name. So instead, if S, which is the value, so string S is equal to value of positions. Positions is essentially going to be the context of that string that we sent to the list adapter that's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, actually has 4 items in it, 4 text labels. So if it is 1, then the image view dot set. So for first item, we're going to set it to 1, which is the image over here. So what I did is I actually just dragged and dropped and I put into the drawable directory. And you'll get this if you download the project. You have all this stuff automatically. All of these PNG images, so you can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, which are being loaded in here. And that's basically all of the code, essentially. There's nothing below it. So it's a matter of just creating an instance of the adapter, sending the adapter the string gets sent into the adapter takes the string, looks at it by position number, and says, well, if it's 1, then set the drawable item for the image view to this. If it's 2, set it to this. And I just labeled them 1, 2, 3, 4, just same names as the numbers, actually. But it's actually going in here looking for the images. So when it loads it, it's essentially just loading an image for each one of the items. This is kind of big, but this is what it looks like, actually. And so the listener is set on the item so that the item, oops, well, okay, it's not going to go any smaller. Now it will. So when you click on the items, it puts up the little toast message, which is all the functionality you're getting. But if you think of the concept, a lot of applications have this sort of interface to it. Mostly, I usually think of the iPhone when I think of this. And the iPhone, believe it or not, is done a little differently than this. It's not broken out into 2 separate components, but similar, actually. Very similar in concept. So that is your list view. And now you think, oh, that's not that sophisticated. Let's go into a grid view. You go, okay, grid view. Well, what is the difference between a list view and a grid view? Well, a list view has got a list. So the layout component is a list view, which automatically gives us this functionality. So we automatically have rows. In a grid, we have rows and columns. So now we can set an entire grid of elements instead. And by changing one component, and you'll actually see the grid view is a little bit easier than the list view, because the list view has got the adapter. We can actually create an adapter for the grid view as well and do the same concept. So here's our grid view. Let me show you what it looks like first so you can kind of visualize it, because you can't see it from the code really. Oops, I don't want to run it as a JUnit. So our grid view, as you might imagine, looks like a grid. What I did is I just took a couple items, 3 of them, and repeated the grid about 4 times, 5 times on it so you can actually see it. But what we've got is rows and columns where we've got spots in the grid. What do we want this? Well, what if we want to create, in fact, you see this all the time actually. What if you want to create an interface that looks like an iPhone? Then you got icons. Obviously you're going to have different icons. I would actually put the labels underneath instead of to the side, make it look like an icon. You can basically make a nice little menu system for yourself in terms of your application. So you might imagine this is used a lot. And if I go and I take a look at the resource file, you can kind of see a similar format going on here, where we have main, which is the same as the list view actually. In fact, if I double click on main, what do I have in here? You can see I've got a grid view. So instead of list view, I'm using grid view, which is the same concept as before, what we just saw a few minutes ago. But here I have slightly different parameters again. In fact, what I would do is just go online and find a nice resource that gives you all of the different parameters for each one of the layouts, and then you can use it sort of like a dictionary when you need to use a grid view. This is how you're going to set the height and width of each one of the columns and how many columns and how you're going to do it essentially. Actually, the number of columns is going to be set programmatically in this particular case, and I called it mobile.xml because this is showing mobile devices, Windows, iOS, Android, BlackBerry, stuff like that, with a little icon next to it. And lo and behold, as you might imagine, the linear layout does come in handy. So each one of those guys, of course, because it's a linear layout, the image and the text is showing next to each other. And this is actually a good example of a linear layout. If I used a relative layout, if I were to rewrite this, I'd probably use a relative layout and put the text label underneath the image instead of next to it. Linear is just going to line them up in a line, one next to the other automatically, unless I set, unless I try to move it around. But so yeah, you can modify this one and then use a relative layout, set the table underneath the image. In this particular case, it's just setting the size of the image here. And again, it's just setting a fake source image, because what we're going to do is load the images programmatically by using an adapter, list adapter. We'll load the list adapter, which is the same list adapter actually. We'll load it into the grid view instead of the list view, so we can sort of see how that works. So here, just an image and a piece of text that's associated with it, so we can set the text label and the image file programmatically. So if we go back in and look at the source code for a second here, we have what you might imagine, the image adapter, which is the same as the list view adapter, and then the main class for the grid view example. The main class is doing the same thing. It's actually taking, now we have a string called mobile OS, and the string has, and here's the funny thing. In fact, here I'll just edit the string for you real quick. Here, I'll just take some items out of the string. There we go. Now we'll have fewer items that show up. So it's just going to go through this array using the adapter. We're going to send this right here. Same code as before, actually, but instead of this being list view, it's now grid view. And we've got this array of names, and we're going to take the names, we're going to send it to the adapter, and then on-click listener is going to send up a toast message, I believe. Yep, then toast is going to find the element with the label and print it out, essentially, which is the same functionality as the last example I showed you. So if I go into the image adapter, look at this, lo and behold, I've got the same structure as before. It's looking at, does the text equal Windows? If it does, show this icon. Is it equal to iOS? Show that icon. It's going to check to see what the text is equal to and then show a different icon. It's the same code as before. It is creating a grid view from the view, taking the view, adding a new view for the context, inflating out, finding the layout for mobile inside of mobile. It's creating, using the values from the mobile values from the string that we created in the main class, excuse me. It's going to set the image based on the selected text using this particular format here, and lo and behold, we get the same functionality as before. So. Actually, I took half the array out, so, and I probably introduced some errors, so I'll just leave this one alone, actually. Oh, added something in here. Now it'll probably run. Yes. Anyway, lo and behold, it's the same concept as the list view, except for it's loading it into a grid view. And it's using an adapter, and because I pulled out half of the icons, I pulled out half of the text labels that I put into the string. I'm not getting all of them on here. I'm only getting one row. But as you can possibly see, it's just starting from the left-hand column and filling up the grid for each one of the items in the array. Okay, so that was the last of the grids. And so we had, there were 6 examples total. I think I showed you the table. Did I show you the table layout? Yeah, show the table layout, list view, grid view. Okay, good. So the other file that I showed you at the beginning, which is called AP Simple, I'm not going to go through the process of loading stuff in. Instead, what I'm going to do is there's 22 examples in this particular. I'm not going to go through all 22. It will bore you silly. So instead what I'm going to do is kind of pick through a couple of the most interesting ones and kind of show you. The ones I want to kind of concentrate are going to be the menus. So the options menu and the context menu, which are two different ones that I showed you in the PowerPoints last week. So there's a table example, there's a web example, and they're labeled as such. So the table example that came out of that file, web example, they're going to be very similar to the table view example, very similar to the web view example. But they're going to be doing something slightly different in terms of the nature of the application, a little bit more coding and main for that. And then there is a list view, there's another list view example in there that's also going to be doing another list with a custom adapter, which might be a little bit more interesting. It's going to be when you unload it, if you unload and load them all in, or if you just look at the packages, if you double click on a file and actually extract the contents of the zip file, each one of these projects is labeled for what it's supposed to be. So you'll see, and if you sort the list alphabetically, you'll see the list view example. So these examples are different than the ones that are in the layout. There's only 6 in the layout. These are a little bit more sophisticated. They're including a little bit more functionality to it. The one I want to show you is called context menu example, to show you the concept of the context menu, excuse me. So let me close this one. And that was called context menu example. They're labeled, hopefully, self-explanatory. So the context menu is, let me just run it so you can see the functionality first, and then I'll show you how it's implemented, so you can see how to do it yourself. Oops. So it's using a list view with a list view adapter, and normally you don't have a mouse pointer, you have a finger. You're pressing the finger and you're holding it. If I just click on the item, nothing happens. If I click and hold, lo and behold, I get what's called the context menu. And in here, in this particular case, I could put another context menu. You see there's no context menu because I'm clicking and I'm holding on the submenu, the context menu that's coming up, and nothing's happening. But if I click on it once and just press it, tap it, essentially with my finger, I get that toast message that comes up. It's going to tell me which item is selected. So it's yet another way of designing your interface with a context menu that's associated, because most people would have a list view with a context menu, or they would have a list view with functionality. Each one of these guys is going to run, it could possibly run an intent, as an example. So this could be, menu item number 1, menu item number 2, could be load this program, load that program for your main menu or something. And then when the user double clicks on it, usually the context menu, however, is used for things like properties and settings and things for that particular item. In this particular case, there's no functionality in here, but it's just used as an example. So for navigational purposes, however, the list view does come in handy. Let me close these out, actually, so we can see what's current for this particular project. So if we look at the resource for this particular project inside of the layout folder, we see main. Main doesn't look that good. Main's just main. Probably has a linear layout that's going to hold a list view. Yep, there it is. Main has a linear layout, and a linear layout's holding a text view. Not very much. So text view is a label. Probably could pull the text view out because we're not even showing it. We're covering it up with the list view that we're loading in there. So very trivial. Nothing to it. In fact, this is probably the default main that came with the project when I created it. So in the source directory, we have show context menu, which is our project topic, our main program that's going to be running here. And in this particular example, it's extending list view, list activity, which I forgot to show you actually. In the other example, when we create something that's working with a list activity, we get the certain methods that are associated with the subclass list from activity. So it's an activity, but it's a specialized activity of a list activity. So we get added features that are associated with it. So we can essentially use different different things associated with it. You can create a context menu with a regular activity. You don't have to create one with a list activity extension. It can be any. So, in fact, context menus work on everything. So, any type of an extension. We know this is an inheritance, I hope, at this point. So here we go. Take a look here. We can set the list adapter. List adapter. I don't think I had this resource in here, did I? Am I looking at the right one? Yes, I am. Here we go. The context menu itself in this particular example is set as a separate XML file. I have another one and I'm going to show you in a few minutes, and I thought that one was this one. It's hard to keep each examples separate, but you can set it programmatically or you can set it in an XML file. If you put it in an XML file, you set the context to the XML file, and you can call each one of them through the r.id for each one of the elements. Or you can set it programmatically, which means you don't create an XML file for the menu. You might notice here that the context menu is appearing in a separate subfolder called menu. Menu does not appear automatically actually with the new API. You actually have to create the folder yourself. You might be able to do it through Eclipse by doing File, New, XML, Menu, and then hopefully it will create it for you. If it doesn't, you can always create it. You want to put it in the menu versus the layout because it's a separate type of XML component. It has different properties to it. If I click on the XML file, what I see here is the ability to kind of create. And some people like to use this method because then you can have a GUI to create the menu items for you. You can also click on the tab here and create the items automatically, using the XML code. But most people prefer this interface. This interface has got all of the text associated with each one of the items. So we've got, this one's the edit, save, delete. And so what we're doing is using a string for this actually. We don't even have to use the string, we can actually type it in. The string, as we've seen before, is going to show up in the values string XML file. In strings we have save, here, delete, edit. These are the strings that are associated with it. So this is sort of an overkill for this type of simplified example, but it's showing you good programming techniques essentially. But it's definitely overkill. I would personally just type it in. I don't know if I would use a string. In fact, in a lot of menus I actually just type in the text as well instead of using a string, but properly you're supposed to use a string for that. So this menu here is the context menu, and the context menu is going to be loaded in main by loading the contents of the content menu. So we can register for context menu this get list view, and the get list view is the list that's going to show up. So when we press on the get items that are in the get list view, the context menu that's registered for it will be invoked, which is this one I just showed you a few minutes ago. So as in the main activity that occurs, especially even with a list activity or main activity, we have the onCreate, which is the constructor for the activity, if you remember that part. And it loads the whatever initializing information that we want for that particular activity. When we use a context menu, we have the onCreate context menu activity. In the onCreate context menu activity is where we can programmatically create the items, or we can do the same thing that we're doing with the onCreate and inflate and use a context menu that's already created for us. And we give the type, instead of it being, in this particular case up here, actually we haven't loaded it yet, but instead of loading the menu, or excuse me, the main.xml file, what we're doing is we're loading the context menu, and the context menu is being registered with the onCreate coming from the menu method. So the onCreate context menu is a different method that's used in the identical reason, identical way and identical purpose as the onCreate is for the activity. So it's inherited from context menu, where onCreate is inherited from activity or list activity, depending upon which one you're using. So on the context item selected, which is different method than on items selected or on click selected. On click from on items selected, which is kind of a different one because that's a listener that we're putting on GUI items. list items. This one is what we're putting on the context menu. So on the context item selected, we're going to get from the menu item, which is one of the items that are appearing in the context menu, we're going to get each one of the item numbers. Each one of them is actually registered as a pointer to that particular item, and each one of the items we're just going to do a simple case switch in here, and this is very common. You'll see this done for almost everything. A case switch makes perfect sense for this type of application. You can have this do anything you want. So in this particular case on the edit, we would probably have some other screen that pops up that allows you to edit something. Here we're just essentially taking the text that's appearing on the menu item and putting in a toast message and showing it to you. And the toast is the same thing that we looked at in the last example. And this is all the example is actually doing. And so you can probably build your entire menu system from this if you're creating an application that was using this type of an interface. You can actually add this in combination with an options menu, but I've put the options menu in a different example so you can sort of see them separately and know which one is which. But this is the long press context menu that shows up. So let's see. Let me close this guy out and let me show you the options menu. And let me just make sure I don't have the options menu. I've done two ways. One hard-coded, the other one using an XML. You can do the context menu both ways. You can hard-code it, or you can also do an XML file. So let me show you the one that is using the XML, which is options menu example, which is this one. So if I load this particular example so you can see what it looks like and what it does first. So you can see there's nothing to this interface, but this is the reason why this little plugin is on my emulator. Because in here, this is the menu button that would appear on your phone on the bottom of your button panel. You usually have something that says menu. When you press the menu button on the phone, it's not the context menu, it's the options menu that shows up. The options menu is this thing that shows up on the bottom of the screen. There's only so far it will show up, and then you'll end up with an automatic more. You'll have to click on the more to get the rest of the items. It does fill up. So I believe it's 9, I believe is the maximum capacity of it, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to look that up. When you press on the option item, you get, voila, another toast message. So it's the same code repeated over and over again. To make the options menu reappear, you just press the options menu button again. There's no context menu. If I hold the mouse down or whatever, nothing's going to happen on this particular example. So let's see how the options menu looks compared to the, let me close these guys actually, context menu. So in the resource, also in the menu directory, you might notice I've labeled this one options menu instead of context menu. Because if I had two of them, and I can very well have two of them in the same project, how am I going to know which one's which? So often I see people go, menu number 1, menu number 2. You go, which one is menu number 1? Which one is menu number 2? Or they'll put one in here, and then they'll hard code the other one. And they'll be looking for the context menu, and no, where'd it go? And they'll mistaken it for the options menu. Just like the context menu, this is exactly the same. It's a menu. A menu is a menu. How it shows up is where you're putting it. So this could very well be a context menu. We could switch it from an options to a context. No problem. It's the same menu. A menu is a menu. Because we're loading it as an XML file. And that's one of the advantages you have if you put it into an XML file. You can use it for different purposes. So essentially these are strings, same as before. It's being loaded from the string resource. If I go into source code and take a look at it, I have one class file the same as before. Lo and behold, you're going to see a lot of similarities as well. On create options menu instead of on create context menu. It's the same methods actually. This particular example is inheriting from activity. So we have view options menu, which extends activity. We have the on create, which is using main, which is that one, that one XML file that we have. And then on create options menu, you notice we don't actually have to set a listener for this. We didn't set a listener for either one actually. All we have to do is make sure that we override the subclass. And if you see this little thing here, this little green arrow, overrides Android activity on create options menu. We're just overriding the method the method itself, by default, does nothing. It's unimplemented. It's actually abstract. Or, excuse me, it is implemented. It's not abstract, but it doesn't do anything. There's no menu loaded. So as soon as you create the onCreate options menu and you put it in your class as a regular old method, just like you created the onCreate context menu, it does the same thing. You're overriding the default activity method. The activity method is providing you that functionality. And the functionality is identical, and you'll notice probably as soon as I go through a couple more examples, everything's labeled the same way. You just substitute the word options instead of context. So down here we have on options selected, item selected instead of on context, item selected, instead of on click, item selected. So, and then here basically doing the same thing as before. In fact, this is practically the identical code. Again, it's basically taking and doing a case switch on each one of the items, and it's doing it on the menu item text, which is next, previous, and list. And to load it is essentially going to be loaded in the XML file. Options menu in the options menu file, which is this one here, which is the one that was loading the image in the text field, or text view, I should say. The other example that is options menu is the one where we didn't create, or did not create an XML file. So if you look in the resource directory for this particular one, you see no menu folder. Instead, you see the layout, and the layout has main in it, and main is nothing more than same main as we saw in the last example. In fact, it is the last example, except for removed the menu from the XML. There's no XML menu anymore. You don't need one. You can do it programmatically. And if you do it programmatically, the source code looks like this. And you might think, well, why don't we just do it programmatically? Sometimes it's easier to do it programmatically. So here we have onCreate options menu, same as before. Menu, and here's we're going to add one item. This is why you want to do it programmatically, because not all the options look the same. Some of them might have, see the other one had, they were all consistent because the layout's consistent. We have an image, and we have a label that is underneath it as an example. And here, one of them has an image, one of them has a label, one of them is an image and a label. Or I don't remember how I have this set. And I actually put an intent on it. And you can do this with using an XML file without doing it programmatically. If you do that, what you're doing is imploding it, loading it into some sort of a structure, and then adding an intent onto it. This is interesting because this is another intent. The first intent that I showed you that ran an automatic feature on the phone was running a WebView, and it was loading a URI, which was associated with a URL, Google, and it was taking a link, taking a string, creating a WebView, and going to that particular address. This one here is doing something extremely easy that looks very sophisticated. It's again setting an intent, which is going to be a new intent, action dial. So now what you do is you go to the reference book or the reference website that you found that has all of the different intents. These are built-in intents. These are activities that are functionality of the phone. And what you can do here in this particular case is use the dialer. You can also use the address book. You can actually, any of the content providers can be done automatically this way, not using an intent, but using a content provider. All of the intents are going to be all of the functionality that's accessible through your application. And so if I run this thing, let me show you what it looks like actually, because it's hard to tell what it looks like from this particular perspective. And here we go. Nothing. No context menu. Nothing. So I go to the options menu. And now I believe the dialer is on this guy here. So if I click on, actually let me exit out of here so you can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Alright, so if I click on this option right here, it should bring up the dialer features, which it does. Let me make this a little smaller so you can see it. It's running an intent to load the dialer, which is a feature of the phone essentially. If I click on one of the other options, it's probably going to load up a toast message. No, it's not going to do anything actually. I don't have anything set. But you can see that they're different. This one's got a icon and text. This one's got text. This one's got an icon next to it. So if you want to be fancy with what you're putting there, and you want to load an intent on there automatically without actually setting a separate menu for the click, you can actually do it programmatically. Kill a couple birds with one stone. In this particular case, what we've done is created the menu options, made them all different, and then added an intent to one of them automatically. And a lot more flexible than creating an XML file, loading the XML file in, creating a case list, essentially, a case switch, basically for each one of the items to do something with it. So anyway, that's the options menu example. We have a couple more examples in here that I'd like to show you, and I'm just going to kind of go through them kind of briefly. I still have a few minutes left here. And the way you're probably going to benefit from all of these examples is to try them out yourself, actually, to take a look at them. We have a radio button example, a checkbox button example, a rating example, which is basically, in fact, the rating one is actually kind of interesting. Not quite as sophisticated. It's using a built-in rating widget. So if I run let me just run it real quick so you can see what it looks like. If I run the rating example, you can see it kind of shows up the little stars essentially on the screen, and you can click on the stars. But you can't click on a half a star. You can only click on the whole star. So here's our 4 stars, and then the button is doing nothing more than showing the toast. But in terms of clicking on the stars, what we're getting is the functionality of there we go, 2 stars. The functionality is kind of hokey because you have to click back in order to remove a star. But it's the on-click events that are interesting about this one in particular, which is updating the result text automatically. And if we take a look here, the screen for this, the layout, is very trivial. It's nothing more than star components. And if we take a look here, we see the layout is a linear layout. And in the linear layout, we have a text view. And in the text view, we have nothing more than, I think it's the label says click here or something like that. And then here's the element here. It's a rating bar. And the rating bar is putting those stars up. We tell how many stars do we want. So we have 4 stars. So we can put 8 stars on here if we wanted to. We're going to load more stars on here. So it's a way of automatically putting on a little rating system. But you have to do the programming to it in order to get the rating when you click on it, to sense the events and then increment something, a counter for how many you've selected. So the interesting part of this particular example is the source that's loaded here, and then we're extending from activity. We've got a rating bar element, a text view element, and a button element. And on the creates, we're adding a listener. And here's the interesting part. We have adding 2 listeners instead of just 1. So in the previous examples, I had just 1 listener. Now we can actually register more than 1 listener or more than 1 item, so that when you click the stars, that listener is incrementing something. And then when you click the button, that listener is putting up the toast message. So it's not really doing very much sophisticated-wise, but it's showing you multiple listeners. So we add a listener. And what we're doing here is we're creating methods instead of using a different technique where we would add an on-click listener and then we would create behavior for the on-click listener. Instead, what we're doing is just creating 2 separate methods. The 2 separate methods are adding the listener. And the adding the listener is going to be an on rating changed versus an on clicked. So on here we have a set on click listener with an on click, same example as we've seen before. And so we have the same concept of the listener being added to the rating bar, but we have an on rating changed. So as soon as the rating changes, which is different than a click, but it's the same similar functionality, but it's a method that comes from this particular listener as a subclass. So and this particular listener is coming from the same base class. So both listeners are pretty much the same functionality. One's customized for rating, the other one's customized for buttons. Or I should say for general functionality. Because normally we put on-click listeners on buttons or on list items or something. And then we use the subclass for whatever listener we're actually intending to use. Okay, the spinner example, let's take a look at that actually. So I'm not going to go through unless somebody really wants me to, because after a while these examples get kind of old. I'm just showing you what's good in here actually. There's the radio button one, which is highly recommended if you're going to try to build forms where people are going to click on items, especially for settings and things. You're going to need eventually to run radio buttons and also checkboxes. And so it's called, one of them is called checkbox. It's in here. Here it is, checkbox example. The other one is called a radio button. Here it is, a radio button example. If you run them, you'll see it's nothing more than a plain old XML file that has a bunch of radio buttons on it, a bunch of text box buttons on it, and showing you the functionality. So when you click on a button, it'll show you the differences between the radio and the checkbox. And the example, the radio button is all controlled together in this particular example, where if you click on one, it unclicks the other ones. The checkboxes, you're going to have multiple click together. So it's showing you both ways of functionality. If you've ever done any HTML programming, and if you've ever worked with radio buttons or checkbox buttons, it's basically the same on the Android as it is in concept on any other language. The spinner example has a custom on-item selected listener, which is merits some looking. Here's the spinner example. Let me show this to you just in case you've never heard of a spinner, which isn't that big of a thing. Actually, I think this probably came from an iPhone kind of concept. It was originally moved into the Android. It looks different though. This looks more antiquated because this is the built-in spinner. What a lot of people have done is, and here's the, it's a multiples. This is the spinner. So you choose. It's like we got United States. So item number 3. This is essentially a selection box, list selection item selected box. And then on submit, it basically takes what's on the click listener and shows it to your screen in a toast message. So it's a multiple line toast message. So it's a pretty easy example. It combines a couple of the concepts you've seen already in some of the other examples. The XML file is fairly trivial. It is main.xml, and we have, here's the item here. It's actually called a spinner. It looks different on different, actually the item itself will look different on different APIs. So the 2.3 is very Visual Basic looking actually. The 4.0 one is rounded and colorful with shaded stuff on it. It's actually nicer looking GUI. So that was definitely improved. So don't judge it by its appearance on this particular demo. And not use it because it looks kind of old. But also it's all stretched out to the width. It's filling it, it's matching parent on the width. So it's not your best looking GUI element. But long story short, we've got the spinner, we have 2 spinners, and we have a button that's associated with it. And so up here in the source, you can see that there's a custom on selected item. So on a selected item, we're going to basically, instead of using the built-in on selected item functionality, what we're doing here is we're implementing, and so for those of you who are in the Java class, this is an interface, and it implements this interface, so it's not inheriting from it, instead it's implementing it. This is the same interface that's being implemented with the on-click listener and on item selected listener, the built-in one. But instead of using that one, we probably could have used it. This one's just showing you how to create your own. So you make your own class, and this one's called custom item selected listener. It implements, which means it's using this interface. The interface has the built-in methods for it. It's implementing the methods. This really isn't doing anything. On nothing selected, it overrid this one here, and on an item selected, it's just putting up a toast message automatically. It's really not, really not changing it that much. But in the spinner example here, we're going to add items on spinner to, which adds the items dynamically. So this is not, in the XML file, we're not putting the items in there. Instead we're going to add them dynamically, which was what you're going to need to do with a spinner because you can't, well, unless you create a big list of strings, you can do it that way. But put them in an array or something like that. But in essence, what we're doing here is the same concept as before. We've created these methods, and we're going to call the method the add items on spinner first, and then we're going to add the listener on the buttons, and then we're going to add the listener on spinner item selected. So on each one of the items that is selected. Then we have the listener on both of them, essentially. That's the more interesting part of the example. So on the item, adding the items is essentially just populating the two spinners. The add listener on the button is essentially working with the button, and then we have the add listener that was implemented that we're making an instance of this class for to add on the spinners themselves. So we have two listeners, one on the button and a custom one on the listener. And we've decided to implement the listener one as a custom class. We didn't have to do it this way, but it just shows you how to implement your own custom listener if you wanted to. So, make more sense if you actually have a reason to use it, and you take a look at the example and go run through it. It's fairly easy, actually. It's doing nothing more than providing you that basic functionality. The date picker, the time picker, and the clock example are kind of interesting. There's a progress bar. Actually, let me show you the progress bar one, because that one is that one you'll probably use a lot, and it's a lot of functionality with a little bit of effort, not too much effort actually. So on the progress bar, it's going to fake a download. Here it is. Just run it so you can see what I'm talking about. If I run the progress bar example, I'm going to fake a download, so I'm going to press download file, and here's my progress bar. It's basically set a timer, so many minutes move a little bit, so many minutes move a little bit, so many minutes move a little bit, and then go away at the end. And this I can show you in 2 seconds actually. And then I'll show you the clock examples because those are actually kind of interesting too. The date picker is actually pretty interesting. So in terms of the GUI item that's being placed on the layout, that's being controlled programmatically, lo and behold, we're using a linear layout, and on the linear layout we just have the button. So we're setting the progress bar, we're setting that programmatically, which you can do actually with all of the items. There are some people that don't like to use the XML interface. You don't have to. You can create all these items and load them on the interface programmatically without using any code on without even bothering with the interface builder, or excuse me, with the XML builder. So let's see. If we take a look at the progress bar activity here, what we're looking at then is a button, and lo and behold, an object called progress dialog bar, which is progress bar we're calling it. It's really called a progress dialog widget. And in that particular case, we're setting the status to 0, then we're changing the status. We're putting a handler on it. And in the handler, we're going to essentially here add, so we prepare the progress bar by setting some parameters to initially start it with, a message for a file downloading that appears underneath it, a style, progress set to 0 to start out with. And we have a little timer that we're going to do. We have a little thread here that we're going to run. It's going to essentially be a timer that's going to sleep for a certain amount of time. So it starts a counter, sleeps, continues the counter, essentially, and updates the progress bar in between. So the update on here says set progress to progress bar status. Progress bar status is just an integer value that's changed from 0 to 100. So you can essentially use this particular format to say, 0 to 5, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, and have it increment a little bit slower. This is just actually going in 2 steps. But you can update it as often as you want, and it just basically set a thread. And this is actually kind of an interesting example because it's setting the handler is the thread activity actually, and the thread is just like any other normal thread that you set in Unix programming, because this is a Linux system actually, and it's a thread just like any other thread. So, and the thread's actually running here on its own without anything happening because there's no file that's downloading. So it's still all happening within the same process, which is why this is working. In other situations, you might have something running and then the progress isn't going to change, and then all of a sudden the progress changes because it's all done. It's like, so because really only one thread's happening at one time, so we don't really have a multi-threaded environment. So anyway, long story short, that is how you would indicate a progress indicator. And I'm kind of going through these a little bit fast, so let me know if you want me to slow down on anything. The date picker and the time picker, actually I'll just show you the date picker. Actually, that one's an interesting one because it looks like, again, it looks like another iPhone GUI widget. Date picker is right here. Date picker. What does date picker look like if I run it? And you may download and run all of these examples and go through all of them if you want. And more power to you if you do. There's the date picker. Oh, that looks pretty interesting actually. You click on the plus, it increments it. So now we've changed it. You can also type in there 1990 if you wanted to or something. And then go 1991, 1992. You can get the values by getting the text that's associated with the date picker and put them in there. So change the date. Okay, let's set the date. It's not really doing anything. It's just printing up the new date up here. So it's taking this information and copying it over. When did I set it to 2012? I guess I put it back. And then it's basically putting it into a text label, text field. So what does it look like? It actually is not too many lines of code. In fact, less than the progress bar. So on the date picker, we have nothing more than creating the local variables for the date picker, which is of type date picker, which is a built-in GUI widget, just like the progress bar that we added to it. And the text view and the button to update things. And we have a year, month, date that's coming out of the three things that are coming out of the text. Let's see, we're setting an ID for it. We're displaying the current date. And then we're taking and saying year is going to be equal to c.get calendar year, basically getting the information from the date picker using the built-in methods to get, instead of getting text, it's get actually. And what do you want to get? Well, we can get the year, the month, or the day of the month, essentially from calendar. Calendar is our instance that we're getting of the date picker, so of the calendar that we're setting. So we can set the current date into the text view simply by getting the text and setting the text of the text view to whatever we got from the date picker. So basically a get and a set essentially associated with and then we can add a listener button, a listener on the button that says, well, when you click the button on the click, show the dialog, bring up the date picker. And then build a non-create dialog for and it's really a dialog actually, the date picker that shows up. Which reminds me, there are some dialog examples in here too. We have, I'm not going to bring it up, but there's an alert dialog, a prompt example, a custom dialog example, as well as another toast example in here as well. So I know you guys are getting tired of the examples. So let me see if there's anything I've missed that I really wanted to cover. Oh, let's look at the clock real quick. There's a clock. There's a nice little clock in here too, a little clock example. In the clock example, it looks very sophisticated. It really is just nothing more than a GUI. I mean, nothing more than a built-in widget that puts up a GUI that looks like an analog or a digital clock. And actually, both of them are in here. So the clock's wrong. The date's wrong. In fact, this is just a picture. But we have the digital clock down here. It says this 3:10. Actually, maybe the clock, it does match it. Maybe, actually, this is a clock widget, so perhaps the time is just set incorrectly on my I believe this example actually does have working functionality in it. We'll take a look at the resource file. In the resource file, in the layout, we have the main. The main's it does have the element in here, which is good. In the linear layout, we have a widget called analog clock, and it is a widget. I thought I was mistaken. So it is an actual clock widget. Clock widget shows an analog clock, puts an instance of an analog clock up there. We can run methods to get time, set time on the analog clock, same way as we can do a digital clock. Here's a digital clock. So it looks like sophisticated functionality, however it's built in. These are just widgets that are part of the library. So again, how do you know all these widgets? Well, you go out and get one of those reference books, or you go on the internet and you find the reference websites that show you all the different widgets. There's a widget for practically everything out there. And what we're doing in the source code for this is essentially just controlling the widget. And here is all of the source code for this entire program that looks so sophisticated. Doing nothing more than making an instance, and it's not setting the time, which is why the time is off. The time apparently is off on my emulator. So it's just making a new instance of the analog clock, and it's making well, you can set the time, you can set the date, you can add some functionality to it, but this isn't doing anything at all. It's just putting it on XML file and just loading it up. In fact, you could take all this stuff out of here except for this line here, these 2 lines, and the program would work the same. But essentially the concept is you want to be able to adjust the time, I don't know, get the time, do something with it. So, well, let me take a quick look to make sure there's nothing else in here that's worthy. The alert dialog, I have a few minutes here, I know, I have too many examples, I know that. The alert dialog actually is interesting, actually, because it's not like the pop-up you get on a web browser with an alert box, and it's not like, it reminds me, however, of like traditional style programming. I'll show you what the example looks like. It comes in handy for status notification, for like, you know, hey, you're not connected, or hey, you haven't done this, or hey, you haven't done that. So in this particular case, you're clicking on the box and this dialog comes up. And the dialog allows you to like say something to the user, hey stupid, you know, log in first or something. So it's a nice little interactive kind of feature, and it, believe it or not, it's a built-in widget just like the clock, just like the progress bar, and you're just setting properties. And you're setting properties on the widget, and you basically set the on-click event on the button to bring up the item. So I'll just show you real quick, and then I'll end on this one because I know a lot of you are getting antsy. Whoops, wrong one. It's the clock. I got lazy and kept some of them open. Here's our analog, or excuse me, our alert dialog builder, where we're going to set the title. And the builder here is just this instance of this object that we're setting for analog. And this is a custom dialog. We can use a built-in alert dialog without setting any custom settings, without doing this. In fact, I have another example that just does a simple dialog. Makes an instance of an alert dialog. We have about 5 or 6 different types of dialogs. You can do a prompt, you can do an alert, you can do a warning, you can do all sorts of different types of notifications, essentially, pop-up windows, essentially. You can even set a context menu to look like an alert dialog and have it come up the same way. All you have to do is set the on-click event to load the context menu instead of the alert. So, in this particular case, the interesting part of this example, and I'll leave it to you to kind of look at, is the fact that you're just setting, you know, set the message, set the cancelable to false to true, you know, set the buttons, set the labels for the buttons, set the message in the alert dialog, which allows you to kind of customize the interface a little bit. So I'll leave you with that. So anything and everything you could possibly want to do in terms of the GUI elements, these particular examples are pertaining to that. So Wednesday we will move further ahead. Can't remember what's on the agenda. I think processes, intents, and something else. But this was the examples that complement the series of PowerPoints that I gave you on last Wednesday that showed you all those GUI elements. Every single one of those GUI elements is in one of these examples here, so you can see how it's implemented. So, all right, thanks for listening. See you on Wednesday. New concepts, past GUI.